Well, Joe, Hayden, Grid Beyond. Okay, perfect. Um, these are actually probably better intros than I did in the past.
We just don't tell you we're recording. We just roll
right.
into
We're
it.
just talking. Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, tell us about Grid Beyond. And we always usually start with kind of telling us your background, how you got into this, kind of the history. And, but yeah, tell us Grid Beyond. What is that?
Yeah. So Grid Beyond's a Dublin, Ireland-based company. Been around for about 14 years or so. Started with a lot of interesting premises around the challenges we're seeing with the grid right now. And the first one, that if you look at a grid characteristic from the electricity side, is island power. It's it's like threading the needle.
What is island power?
You're on an island. You cannot count on anybody else for your power. You got to build it to a reliability factor that allows your commercial industrial community to compete on a world stage. If you overbuild it, it's too expensive for that community to compete on the world stage. If you underbuild it and it's unreliable, that's also bad. So the characteristics of island power are very tight between the generator community and the user community. And just as an example, the highest priced power in North America is Hawaii for that same reason. ERCOT's different. I mean, ERCOT is surrounded by our ego. I'm a native Texan. I can say that, not surrounded by water. But we operate it that way. We want a firewall against bad decisions being made by other grid operators around the country. And so so Grid Beyond's got a lot of experience around very tight integration between the user community and the generator community, and then an overextension of rapid deployment towards renewables with maybe not thinking through thoroughly the impacts of disruption and the fact that sun and wind can get interrupted. They just had December before last, the wind just died out and prices skyrocketed. But Grid Beyond's been operating in that environment for a long time. And we were seeing these same characteristics developing in North America. Came over about 4 years ago, right before COVID. Had to wait about 18 months to see that come through. It was a great time to keep customers, a terrible time to go find new ones. And so 2 years ago, that's when I joined Grid Beyond as part of their North America expansion. I was with Power for 5 years.
Okay.
Running ERCOT for them. Now I run North America. But ever since then, Grid Beyond has expanded into Canada, Japan, Australia, and now we're in every major ISO in North America, or will be shortly.
Okay. So you were there 2 years ago, or you came over here 2 years ago? Where were you at before that? Like, what's your background?
So I've always been in the utility sector. Sold the broad-based, broad network voice and data wireless networks for Motorola and for Ericsson to the utility sector. And then dabbled in some other things as startups and whatnot, kind of like a Ring on steroids device that was kind of a virtual security guard, virtual police officer. You stick a light, a camera, a speaker, and a light pole, and now you got full abilities to interface with things going on. Flash the lights, use the lighting in a broad parking lot, for example, as a force multiplier to flash, strobe, light up or brighten up, dim down. So the good people knew everything was under control, and the bad people knew there was a lot of eyes on site. And that was very, very disruptive. I mean, going to market, the technology form factor, how you priced it. I did 7 years of that before making a change and then getting into demand response.
I see those things everywhere now.
Yeah, they're all over. We put it into a light fixture, and so the form factor was very camouflage, for lack of a better term. But a camera inside, 360-degree view, be able to act to certain things, keep people out, make sure people that you want to know are there, let them know you're there for for vendors, partners, cell sites, those kind of things. But it was a fun startup. I enjoyed it.
So I don't know. This may not have anything to do with it. Probably doesn't, but the whole outage today, did you see that?
AT&T?
Yeah. What's going on? What was the deal
a solar
there?
flare.
So I heard that, but it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
This is the time for the tinfoil hat, probably. Okay.
Yes.
So Sarah and my son are both AT&T. I am too. And they got iPhones, I had to go Samsung. Unfortunately, sorry, Samsung. Last year, I'm sure they don't listen, but last year I did, and my phone worked the whole time. Theirs did not. So how could it be a solar flare? It only hits iPhones.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
No, I think it was network based.
Yeah, it had to be.
Mm-hmm.
It had to target. Like, I would love to know if there was anybody but iPhone users like we're dealing with.
I didn't notice an
AT&T.
outage, but it said that it affected AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. I have Verizon. I have an iPhone. I didn't see an outage.
So
once.
I have AT&T, but I have a Samsung. My kid and Sarah both have AT&T, but iPhones. Theirs didn't work.
Huh.
Yeah.
So what's the conspiracy theory? Is it China?
I'm wondering if like Iran came after our like targeted iPhone users on AT&T or something.
A cyber attack or some sort.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In my hat, bro.
I mean, it's possible.
It's possible. Right? It's definitely possible.
I wouldn't rule out a solar flare though.
But how would it? Why
Things
would it
like
only hit
things
iPhones?
like that is kind of weird. But solar flares are a real thing though.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
I saw something like 1972. There was something that happened. I mean, I'm so
solar
young.
flare
that
can essentially act as
there.
like an EMP where it like blasts all electronics.
Yeah.
There's a few movies based on that, aren't there?
I'm sure there is.
Like a solar flare hits and we go back to the Stone Age.
Yeah. That's why I got the Defender, man. So I could like roll around. It won't get impacted by EMP.
The Defender right now is not living through good times.
Man.
I don't know if it's going to live through bad times.
This clutch, man.
This is not a wartime vehicle right now.
No.
It's not defending anything.
I got a 94 Land Rover Defender. It's beautiful.
Uh-huh.
But it is a huge.
It's a 1994.
It's a 94 Defender. So yeah, I got it. It's in the shop now for a clutch issue. But
would have never thought you would have said that it's in the shop.
Yeah, it was a shocker. Huh? Yeah. This time, this will be the last thing I got to fix.
There you go. After this, it's going to be good.
Right. After this is the last thing. We're all good. So I hope. But so Grid Beyond, what kind of involvement have you guys had? I mean, say your time there has been kind of the prime for Bitcoin mining in Texas, or I guess just after the prime. But have you seen that Bitcoin mining grow within Grid Beyond, or your guys' impact?
I think it's been an intersection of a lot of things. What Bitcoin mining looks for, and what Grid Beyond's been doing. So what I didn't elaborate on was we've been in demand response, which is that premise. And the analogy I use is the grid is like a room in a ship, and the ceiling is rock solid generation 5-10 years ago. It was coal, it was oil, it was gas. It was very reliable. It didn't adjust based on weather patterns, so it never moved.
Right.
But water rising up and down in that room, right? That's demand. That's demand for power every single day. And during extreme weather conditions, that water can rise real high, and then it drops off in the evenings, and then you got a huge amount of headroom. So demand response is a global, program, and ERCOT does it. And 5 years ago, they only had essentially 2 programs that they were available. And the premise is for somebody using power to, in the bigger picture, be available if needed somewhere someday in the future. ERCOT needs to call and says, you know what, that water's rising so high in the room that we need headroom. And so we need you to pause your business for a little while. And if you'll do that for us, we don't know how long it may last. We want to test once a year just to make sure that you do what you say you can. And you'll do that. We'll pay you money day in and day out, month after month for that scenario that may occur somewhere in the future to help us not overbuild the grid.
Yeah. So what do you guys do with that then? Are you guys basically handling people's demand response, and are you curtailing, or are you like, what is Grid Beyond's role in that?
Yeah. So first and foremost, it was to monitor the grid conditions and keep in touch with what is called the RTO or the ISO, which is what ERCOT is here, and making sure that we know when they are looking at conditions that are setting up for that potential scenario. And then we'll communicate those indications to our customers and let them know when they need to take action. Our CEO, for example, in Grid Beyond's broader history, it comes from a controls background. And so control elements to this come into play, especially as you see the grid's conditions around when the ceiling's starting to fall, because we've got more wind and solar now that can fall out, that can disrupt. Well, that can bring down that supply level. The water rising at the same time creates a squeeze play.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are the incentives that the grid operators are willing to give for somebody using power to be available in shorter and shorter cycles?
Mm-hmm.
And so a couple of years ago, for example, one program ERCOT had would kick in when the water level, well, let me step back. ERCOT's got a number of levers that they look at. The first lever is anybody who's exposed to the real-time price for electricity.
Mm-hmm.
If your prices are spiking up from, say, $4 to $40 to $400 to $4,000, somewhere along that way, there's so much pain that says, I'm going to shut off.
Right.
Bitcoin miners can do that very quickly and easily. A lot of other flexible load-based industries do that. ERCOT is an equal opportunity megawatt harvester. So we help them by getting people enrolled into these programs as part of that harvesting program, and then we take a split or a fee for that. But the first one is real-time price for power. If anybody's allergic to that, they come offline. If that does the trick, ERCOT takes no further action. 4CP, maybe a program you've heard of, coincidental peaks. That does the trick. People chasing that kind of revenue stream that's around 50 to 60,000 a megawatt a year. That does the trick. They take no further action. The water keeps rising or the ceiling's starting to fall more. There's a program called ERS that's worth about $60,000 a megawatt a year.
Man.
That kicks in at around, so now the water's rising. And so if the water's rising, and I keep using that analogy, but if demand was within 3,250 megawatts of whatever that ceiling is, give or take, ERCOT has they can do a lot of things on their own as far as making determinations, but a general rule of thumb, 3,250 megawatts to wherever that capacity limit is, that'll kick in one response or called an EEA3. That's the ERS program. If it's still rising, demand's still rising, it goes to 3,000 megawatts. That's another program called non-spin.
Right.
Goes to 1,750. Another program called RRS. There's another program now called ECRS. So as these progressions of demand get close to that supply line, that's when ERCOT's calling and dispatching. And we handle that management of progression, communications, warnings, and then we'll either send out as a manual process on that, or we can do it completely integrated and automated so that there's no human interaction whatsoever.
Is demand response the only one that's paid kind of like, hey, you sign up for demand response, you're going to get paid X based on your megawatts? Is it the only one that is like, you get it even if they don't call you?
Oh, yeah. It's not to do something.
Right.
It's to be ready and available to do something.
What now, if you don't participate, like if you're participating, you say you'll turn down and you don't, what's the ramifications for that?
So there could be penalties.
Yeah.
There could be, you can get kicked out of the program if you're chronic. I mean, that's why it's so important to understand the big picture in the room, because when they do call, you just know you're one of the last bastions of resources to keep the pain and agony of everyone else from going through brownouts and blackouts because they couldn't get enough headroom on those programs to prevent those outages.
Do you enroll in every single one of these programs, or is it just kind of you're maybe in one and then some people are in the other ones? Or
so as time has gone on, and as we see more and more of that tighter integration between the generator community and the user community, and in a state like Texas where we've got a lot of growth going on, so generation capacity is trying to keep up with the growth, outlooks. The programs are getting more sophisticated. The timing of response is getting shorter. The incentives tied to a faster response is getting greater. And so as you see those things tightening up with incentives adding to the process, all these are designed to give more headroom to ERCOT. So faster, quicker, standby with a full integration capability on controls. That's where the future is going. That's what we saw in the UK and Ireland all these years before we came over here. And so that's what's unique about it.
When you say controls, like controls from the utility level, like are they going to be involved on the actual curtailment of things?
They can be involved in the curtailment, tied in via an API into the mining software of the miners.
Does that give the utility a lot more confidence, I guess, in bringing kind of these large scale? Because like you mentioned too, like there is some fear sometimes of bringing miners on or doing large scale deals with them because you see them fold up, disappear, not pay their bills, rumors of all the different horror stories that have happened.
Yeah.
If a utility has more controls, are they going to be more inclined to kind of proceed forward with some of these large scale mining projects?
So we don't represent the utilities.
Yeah.
And we're not representing what ERCOT per se.
I'm going to tell everybody that you said that this. I'm joking.
No. So, and there's movements going on to have, the grid control those resources to a greater degree, which does not sit well with a lot of Bitcoin miners.
It doesn't sit well with me, honestly. But I understand where a utility would be like, look, just to basically ensure that this is not going to be a strenuous thing on the grid in the event that we need it. And we can ensure that maybe that's a way they cut deals with some groups from a collateral standpoint. Because collateral is the biggest issue for miners usually. On
the rep side and on the contract of power side,
well, that's true.
Those positions are all on that, right? This what we do is not based on collateral.
Yeah.
It's really based on can we count on you? It's a service. Okay. Yeah. Can we count on you? We'll test once a year if absent an event to see if you can do what you say you can, and if you test out on that, which is a very small, like maybe a 30-minute test, depending on what the situation is in the program.
Right.
You're good to go for another year or two or three. And they'll pay you until they call you and say, we got that situation brewing and we need your help.
Okay. But they do have a hierarchy. I didn't know that from like the demand response is the first call. And then
actually,
it goes on. Well,
again, an informal call is anybody exposed to the real-time price of power.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Right. Then you just do it based on market conditions, whatever makes sense for you. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's like showing up at the gas station and being used to paying $3 a gallon, and now it's $30.
And you're like, oh, shit,
you're not going to fill up.
Right.
You're going to wait. So if you're exposed to that, you're coming offline and you're going to let that pass and wait it out. And
which doesn't cost any money. It's like, okay, you're just letting the market take care of itself.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But when they start calling, it'll go, demand response first and then the next level?
Yeah. ERCOT has these I guess their dispatch terminologies, EA1, EA2, and EA3. And it's like DEFCON 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, but it's only 3. But they have multiple programs in what's called the ancillary services programs that are tied to that.
Yeah.
And a seasonal program called ERS.
Yeah.
And to get back to your question, so we can look at those programs, and when we say enroll a client into these demand response programs or with ERCOT or anywhere that we're operating in, which is all the major RTOs, we'll put them all in at the same kind of not at the same time. We'll put them all in as say kind of a check mark, and then we'll look at where are the monetary values greatest gains for the customer, for the end user, in putting them in those programs. And we can figure out what best combination of those programs can work in getting even a greater monetary value for the load.
Is there a difference? And I'm sorry, Jake, I'm hogging questions here, dude, but I'm curious because I'm working on something too that this is all applied to. So
I see those hamster wheel turning.
So from we got the different load zones and all that throughout ERCOT. Are you seeing? Is there a benefit in being? Obviously, I know West is where everybody went early on.
Yep.
I'm seeing and hearing more shift now just to South, and it might be just due to opportunity, right? But is there an issue with, there's multiple layers here, I guess, ancillaries getting kind of diluted or oversold, or is there a limit of some sort, depending on what kind of zone you go to? And is there a benefit in being in one versus another right now based on the market?
Yeah, there's some congestion issues that certainly West is dealing with that no other nodes or zones are dealing with in ERCOT.
And does that make it more beneficial for miners then over one of the other ones?
To being out of that area?
Right.
It would.
Right.
Yeah, you have higher price spikes and higher volatility.
In the other ones?
No, in West. In West,
okay.
Yeah.
Some of them like the volatility, right? That allows you opportunities to sell back if you got a block.
It would, yeah.
But, okay. So where, from your experience right now, like, are you seeing more activity in one zone versus another, like new customers coming in? to one of the other zones?
I mean, I'd say mainly in the west and south, because I think the congestion issues will eventually, get addressed. It's going to take some time, but I mean, for shorter term, probably south is probably getting more activity around it than the west is.
Is that going to result in any? I mean, like the west is basically that's where everybody went early on. Did you start seeing the demand response, I guess, payments or value get diminished because you had a lot more miners coming out to that area?
No. So demand response does not typically get influenced by what zone you're in.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay.
So ERCOT is an equal opportunity harvester, as I mentioned. And so what that means is that they're not picking winners and losers. They're essentially diluting what value they will pay
across the whole thing.
Okay. It's called proration. So, if we got $3 on the table, we're each going to get $1. If we have 6 people in the room, then everyone's going to get 50 cents. And so that's what's happening in the value of the megawatt of these programs is that they start to dilute or get oversubscribed.
Okay.
And so the values come down. And so, for example, RS at some point in time in history has been worth $150,000+ a megawatt. Currently, it's probably sitting at just over 100.
Man,
maybe even a little less depending on what seasons we're in.
What time frame was that where it got reduced from 150 to around 100?
In the last 3 or 4 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like COVID, for example, when COVID hit, it took a lot of load offline. So the values of what was worth the megawatt came down quite a bit, but then it came back up.
Yeah.
But there was only one ancillary service program essentially, and now there's 3.
Okay.
And so ECRS currently is one of the greatest value, maybe close to a little under $300,000 a megawatt a year. And so these programs are with a different set of dynamics on each, can fit into whatever the comfort level and appetite is of the miner to decide what's your best place to go. Today it could be ECRS, tomorrow it might be RRS, the next day it could be non-spin. When we enroll clients, we put them in a check mark on all of them, and then we work with them saying where your best opportunity for having that load available is best for you longer term.
If I understand this correctly, here's an analogy that I'm going to use, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys act. So I pay this group called Energy Ogre to manage my personal utility bill, and so they take care of everything for me, and they're constantly looking at different electricity rates and different providers to give me the best possible deal. And I'd pay them a flat $10 a month subscription. I don't worry about shit. My energy provider has changed like 5 times in the last year.
Really?
Yeah. And my bills have been really, really low. Payments are automatically taken care of. So it seems like you guys are doing that on a much larger scale with demand response and the miners. But you guys are taking a cut instead of like $10, right?
Yeah.
You're managing that relationship.
Yeah. I think what your ogre's doing is he's looking at 20 different suppliers of electricity.
Yeah.
And he's seeing what new programs they're coming into. I mean, it'd almost be like, I think, paying somebody to watch credit card deals and juggle you in and out of credit card deals because this sign up fee with this kind of points to do so and this APR. So that's what they're doing. We're not doing it from a standpoint of multiple vendors. It's all through ERCOT.
Yeah.
And all through their programs.
But I'm saying in the aspect of you're managing that relationship and making it easier because you guys are in the know with everything that's changing with these various programs, pulling you in one program, pulling you out of program, essentially optimizing that relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because today one program could be worth more money and tomorrow conditions change and another program could be better. They may change the commodity contract scenario because they feel like they could do better there. Maybe that makes more sense to put them into a lower paying program, but it gives them more leeway as to when they would have to dispatch with a little more latitude of how often they're available. So 5% of the time they may want to be out of the market. That's a good 5% that's good for, say, missing out on the top 5% of the prices that occur when spikes occur, or it's a better position on a block and index to have a commodity contract in place and not be overly committed to ERCOT's requirements for a certain program. So we just look and blend all those different aspects together to say what's our best position here for the next 2, 3, 4 months.
Are you guys like working with the miners on trying to acquire the power, or is it one where they get their power contract and then they call you guys about trying to maximize their demand response or ancillary revenues?
Yeah, they work that separately. We don't do anything on the supply side.
So you're not a broker or anything like that?
Not a broker,
right.
but we work with a lot of commodity players. I mean, we've worked with Pump Jack Power quite a bit in this space. We like working with those guys.
My boys.
Shout out.
Yeah, we'll get Ryan tomorrow. Yeah.
Nice. So yeah, that crypto power, I guess those guys are. Yeah.
I got to tell him I need to talk to him. I'm a Bitcoin guy. I don't like the word crypto in there. That's just
Bitcoin power.
Yeah.
Bitcoin power. But yeah,
there you go.
Sorry,
that's all right.
We bleep the word crypto every time it comes on.
Yeah.
Okay. So, he'll have a beep on there, but it's good. We love you, Ryan. It's so good, so good. But so okay. Well, I've got obviously some clients that I work with that. I do get a lot of questions. That's why I was asking about things getting oversubscribed from in the ancillary market. You mentioned the one dropping from like 150 to 100. If the kind of pace of activity kept up in Texas, is there some real threat of those values getting further diminished? Or are we kind of at a point where things will kind of hold steady from a value perspective on these different programs?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll say this. Zone J in Manhattan, for the longest time, was probably the highest valued megawatt, certainly in the U.S. There's another kind of similar program in Canada and Ontario called Global Adjustment. That also was worth quite a bit of money, probably in the $350,000, $400,000 range. But getting back to New York, if you're worried about values for megawatts and demand response, if that verdict with Trump that just went down holds true as to people wanting to do business in New York or avoiding it, you can see demand requirements going down with huge amount of capacity staying there because it's already been built out.
Right.
You could expect values to come way down.
Really?
There's no business, no industry. So they don't want to go there. It's a harsh environment, right?
Open power.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. There's just the utilization going to be very low. In Texas, we've got a great outlook, right? I mean, the future is very bright on growth. The future is very bright on demand. So that ceiling has to keep up with it, right? And so the water levels are going to continue to rise cyclically, based on weather, based on other, conditions. We still have more wind and solar that we're adding to the grid as well. So what's going to fill the gap is highly flexible loads, and then batteries. Batteries are going to start coming into play quite a bit. And that's on the edge. That's on the C&I side of things. That when you see grids that are not operating as effectively as they should, like California, for example, either you're going to move because you can't make your widget, you can't do your Bitcoin, or you're going to take action to figure out how to fill in those gaps of bad decisions that have been made in the grid. That's where we see batteries in the future filling a lot of that those short-term and long-term, fall offs and when they occur.
What are the other, outside of Bitcoin mining, what are the other forms of flexible loads?
Outside of Bitcoin mining?
Yeah.
I mean, there's some of those ancillary service programs we talked about, the oil and gas space, very responsive on a lot of those fronts. We enrolled a lot of oil and gas companies into it. Now, as a side note, getting back to Uri for a second and kind of giving you a broader perspective here on this, and then I'll get into more verticals that you're talking about. So that scenario that I was talking about in the water in the room. So when Uri hit, the ceiling was dropping. And the ceiling was dropping because the wind turbines 400 feet in the air got froze up. They couldn't rotate and spin. Solar panels were covered in ice and snow. Natural gas, when it's flowing through the lines, has a freeze point of 32 degrees, just like water. So a lot of gas got backed up. Now, you could argue that we didn't winterize. We didn't do some things here. Energy Transfer Partners, they invested a lot in winterization and made an $800 million windfall for that week, essentially, because natural gas that normally sells at $250 a BTU was selling at $700 a BTU. So you could say that, well, look at them. They made all that money, right? Well, they invested. They took the risk. That could have been sunken costs. They would have never recovered, but we had a generational storm. So what was happening too was as the ceiling's falling and all that generation capacity is coming offline, natural gas wasn't flowing to the generation plants. So we were going from 65,000 megawatts to around 40,000 megawatts. Well, what's everyone doing at home? And it
turning the power on.
They're trying to stay warm, right? And so huge amount of pressure going the other way. And so the squeeze play that occurred, FERC has a mandate, even though we're not mandated by FERC, but the infrastructure and the physics are the same, has a mandate that says if you're in a condition, what's is called a grid imbalance, for 9 minutes, you have to shut down your grid. You have to completely shut it down. We were in that 9 minutes, that phase of 9 minutes. 6 minutes into it, we figured out how to clear it. ERCOT figured out how to clear it, or the utilities, or anybody else.
Like if we had failed there for that 9 minutes, what's that result in? I've talked about it before.
So all of ERCOT just shuts down the whole state?
Right?
With 3 minutes to spare, we figured out how not to shut the entire electricity grid down in the state of Texas during an Arctic blast.
That's crazy.
So you want to hear about the cataclysmic aspects of what that would look like? I mean, life and infrastructure and busted pipes. I mean, just go down the list.
Yeah. There's a book, and it's called Going Home. A buddy of mine who also wears a tinfoil hat like to bed, he told me about it, and I read it probably, I don't know, 3 months before Uri happened. And I remember hearing about, we're going to lose the grid kind of stuff. And that was the first thing that popped in my head. It's like the entire society collapses within like 2 days, and it was an EMP. And yeah, it's like, man, that like we were very, very close to basically going back to like dark ages from an electricity standpoint.
About 2 to 3 months would have been out without power because it's a black swan. It's a black swan event. There's like 7 or 8 sites across the state that have to start. And then as you bring the grid up, it's very slow increments because you've got to maintain the balancing fact. And so,
and it's tiny. It's a tiny
very
fraction,
tight margin.
Like half a hertz or something, right? 0.5% swing either way. You got to stay within this tiny. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, and
that's the parts people don't understand about. And that's why when I hear so many people talking about Bitcoin mining, like it really does help. It really does help balance things out. And because of, like you said, the ability to turn up and down, like that. I've said this before on here multiple times, but obviously I haven't said it to you, but I was in Dubai last year, and or I guess last year. And I talked to a nuclear engineer who told me they would mine Bitcoin. They use it at a nuclear facility. And he said we would mine Bitcoin if Bitcoin was worth zero because of its ability to kind of curtail your load and bring it down in a safe and reliable, and it's the safest way to basically bring down or bring up a nuclear facility. And like that alone is like, that's a value to the mining space that people just don't get outside of, utility level folks or grid beyond type people and people that work in the energy space. So,
I have a dumb question.
Yeah.
The turning on and turning off, like what is that? Like does ERCOT call a miner and say, hey, turn off? Or is there a notification? Or is it like, is there software? Is it automatic? Like what is that mechanism?
Yeah, they send out the alerts for when these conditions are progressing into what's called the EA1, EA2.
So they give you a little bit of a heads up, like, hey, this is kind of coming down the pipe. Be prepared for it.
Yeah, depending on the program, you either have
signal.
Yeah. Put the
bad signal.
Yeah, exactly.
Bitcoin.
There you go.
Bitcoin somewhere.
Depending on the program, you may have 10 minutes to drop to your voluntary level. So it's not like the whole thing. You can set your own voluntary levels of what you're willing to give in that flexibility to the grid. So there's one that's like you get 10 minutes. There's another one you have 30 minutes. One of the ancillary service programs has a reclosure tied to what's called an under frequency relay. So if that imbalance occurs in a regional sense on the grid, it automatically trips a shut off at the site. That was the only option ERCOT offered a couple of years ago, and what was called RRS. Now they've got 2 other ancillary service programs that they allow or available that don't have that instantaneous shut off. A lot of people don't like having that condition. So it may bring back the value of that program because it's kind of gives a little bit more safety net. And it's the last bastion of progression before, they get to blackouts or brownouts. But industry wise, it's an equal opportunity harvesting mechanism, right? It's about incentives. So can you find flexible load? Or do you have non-critical load? Traditionally, that's all been at the meter where that kind of perspective occurs. Now, depending on how a company operates, whatever industry they're in, they can voluntarily set some level or percentage of what their overall usage is on a regular basis as being what's available into those programs. What Grid Beyond does, and I mentioned our controls background capabilities, is we'll sub-meter at the, behind the meter, we'll identify and isolate where there's areas of non-critical load, where there's areas of flexible load, because every increment of harvested availability of flexibility that can be put in these programs is monetary return into those operations.
Yeah.
But the oil and gas space has been very flexible historically on the upstream and the midstream as well, depending on the determination. Downstream, not so much. Cold storage facilities, really flexible in that front. HVAC systems with building automation systems in place, very flexible in that front.
Do data centers have the same ability? Because they have to guarantee uptime essentially to their consumers. So are there any data centers looking into this? How does that work? What are the implications if they are shutting down?
First kind of way we look at that vertical is, are they their own data center?
Yeah.
Or are they a tenant-based data center? If they're their own data center, then they can pretty much address the implications of what it would mean to shut down. They know what their redundancies are. Mm-hmm. They're in full control on every level. And so you see a lot of some of the big banks and credit card companies that do that because they own and control their own data centers. For the tenant-based ones, if you've got some tenants that are 10, 29 reliability down to 3, 4, 9 reliability, depending on your tenant mix, you have a more open conversation about the implications of what this additional revenue stream can bring into a site that has backup power and can be available. They just want to be very, very careful when that UPS kicks in because of a switch over from, say, grid power to the generators, because that's bringing that power off the grid. Now they're going into island mode with their generators, but that's revenue that's available to them when ERCOT has these scenarios that occur. It just depends.
Yeah.
Depends on their appetite. And batteries are going to be kicking in that area quite a bit as well. But, you guys probably know better than most. Anyone who blends in data centers and crypto mining into the same kind of category, they're completely different animals.
They're very different.
Yep.
Yeah.
Over at Atacon Energy Solutions, my new place, that's like we build projects, infrastructure out for large scale flexible load projects, but also like AI type projects as well. But yeah, they're very different businesses of what I've learned already just from, the short period of time I've been over there. The footprints are very different, and the flexibility of the load is very different too, it seems like. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting. There are a lot of those groups, and it kind of ties to what I want to ask you now is like, from your guys' experience, and I don't know how much you can tell, but like you actually probably can, are most of the bigger miners now doing a combination of like they're allocating a certain portion of their fleet or megawatts under contract to demand response and retaining a portion of it and not contributing it to demand response? Or are they typically just saying, oh yeah, here's our whole load? And are you seeing, and I don't know this part, I don't know if you can tell, what percentage would you say are they buying a block of power versus like running index?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah.
That you can share anyway?
Yeah. I think as the value of Bitcoin goes up, there's this tendency to reevaluate the strategy, right? And I'll give you two really good examples. So a couple of Bitcoin miners that we have, initially when they signed up on their commodity contract, wanted to do what we call real-time price avoidance. So they've established a threshold that if prices get to this point, we want to shut down. That's not ERCOT. That's just exposure to
commercial market decision. Right?
It's it. Yeah. It's it. They decided somewhere along the value chain of what Bitcoin got to, that they don't want to be open to real-time price avoidance at all.
Mm.
They don't think, even though sometimes very short spikes of power costs will go up, the duration of which that could happen is probably so small. I mean, because we're talking less than 5%,
right,
maybe 2 or 3% from an SLA standpoint. That
what's
they're
SLA?
service level agreement.
Okay, all right.
Depending if you've got customers for your side or what you're meeting for your investors. So they shut off that option and just want to be available full time for the ancillary services and cash in on that roughly $300,000 a year in ECRS revenue per megawatt.
Wow.
Right? Per megawatt. So then we got another one. Yeah. Yeah.
For some of the big guys too, man. That's a ton.
Ton of money.
Yeah.
And it's liquidity.
Right.
ERCOT settles every 30 to 45 days. So you're in through that 300 megawatts or 150 megawatts. ERCOT will clear based on your availability, not even dispatching you.
Yeah.
Just being available for this scenario that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Sometime in the future. And they'll clear and send a check for 30, 45 days later.
Can you get that even if you run an index, or do you have to have a block?
Block or index doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Now, this is completely separate, and this is ERCOT paying for.
Just because you're
enrolled in that program.
You're enrolled in it, and you'll
and
shut down if
they can count on you.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So that's one example. Then we had another example where you see a lot of Bitcoin miners shopping with their suppliers. I want an all-in price.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what's your willingness to come offline? What percentage of the time can you handle? Well, we want to stay up 95% of the time. We can handle a 5% off. Okay, 5% off the time. You can do that based on your all-in power. If we might be able to do that. It may take more than 5% offline to get there, but we'll manage that, and then we'll give you that price. Now, the commodity or the supplier is playing the game of how to get there with not only the pricing mechanisms, but also with demand response being leveraged to its full extent. And so that gets a miner an all-in, as long as they know that there could be times they're going to be cut off for power, because that's when prices are jacking up, and we're getting you to that price you want, but you may have to do some offloading on a real-time price avoidance strategy to get there.
Okay. Do you think, based on where we're at today, like assuming we had another Uri type event, like how much benefit has came from miners being on grid and the participation through demand response and all that, like from a stability standpoint? Is there, like, how do you think, how much more resilient are we now than we were then?
Yeah. You're that industry is it's a contradiction to everyone else.
Yeah.
So if you kind of run through Uri, and if you see demand going a certain way, there's a really good chance, and very strong parallel to that, pricing's going that way. Right. For power.
Okay.
And so
I guess that makes sense.
Miners are completely allergic to higher prices. And in scenarios like that, prices go from $3 to $30, $300 to, and before Uri, or at Uri, the cap was $9,000 a megawatt hour. It's now $4,500 or $5,000, I think.
Yeah.
So somewhere along that value curve, I don't know, mining is so, I think, dynamic that, let's just say Bitcoin mining doubles or triples or quadruples. Most likely those operations, and I don't mean to speak for them, but most likely, if they are to come offline temporarily to help a Uri, help the grid from a Uri, that power coming offline gives headroom between supply and demand, which is what ERCOT desperately needs during those moments, but has to plan accordingly way, way, way in advance. Somewhere in that scenario, the Bitcoin mining community is either going to say, I'm not more important than everybody else, so I will come offline to give headroom to ERCOT. I've been getting paid for this moment, so I know the big picture and I understand that. And economically, if I do pause, even though Bitcoin is worth a whole lot more right now than it was, say, a year, month, or whatever ago, I can make up for that and reproduce, go after it again after I'm returned online.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of industries that don't operate that way.
Right.
I mean, that's the lobbying group that needs to be out there trying to represent that there's certain verticals that, we operate in that say, I know about this program that ERCOT's trying to drive here. And what does that do, right? Well, finishing the point, if this was to happen, we walk away from a lot of meetings and go, here's the big picture. And I go, no, we're not going to do it. Well, that means, are you more important than anybody else? You're going to be operating and running power to do whatever you do, even though the grid is at its peak limits of being able to sustain reliable delivery of power to everyone.
Yeah.
You're just saying you're more important than everybody else.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. We know where we stand, right?
Right. But that's also how you end up.
You just need a public shaming list.
Right.
Right.
Just like a Twitter bot that just constantly posts to the people who
Look at
are
these a-holes.
consuming the most power who are not in the program.
Right.
But yeah, that's also how you bring regulatory scrutiny that you don't want. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So, yeah, that's why I don't like hearing people complain about miners reaping the benefit of these ancillaries.
Being flexible.
Right. And it's like, that is what we need.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. Like oil and gas companies have the same, any really industrial size load has that opportunity, don't they?
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
on some level.
Yeah, it's at some level. And sure, it's a lucrative thing, but like from the resiliency standpoint, it's a good thing, right?
Yeah. And the bigger picture is, for example, the ERCOT equivalent in the mid-Atlantic region of the country is called PJM.
Yeah. Right.
So it's like 13 states up there. Well, their long-term ceiling to water level kind of average they shoot for is 25% of reserve margin. Well, that's a lot of infrastructure that has to be built out.
Just sit there.
That's just sitting there waiting to be used. ERCOT's target's been about 15% during COVID, maybe or right before COVID, it got down to maybe 7.5 or 8%. Well, that means you drive efficiency, you drive innovation, and you drive coordination between the user community and the generator community of how to make that work as effectively as possible. Because that whatever infrastructure you put in place, this is where it all comes to roost on your bill, right?
Yeah.
So you have a 30-year utility bill represents all that infrastructure that is in the investment taken to get it out there, right? And so that 30-year bill is represented every month in your what's called T&D charges, your transmission and distribution charges. Well, in the summertime, we have these programs called 4CP, 4 coincidental peaks. So each day of the months of June, July, August, September, there is a day where the highest demand 15-minute interval of power being used across the state. It obviously coincides with very extreme weather conditions, but it's the highest 15-minute moment that everyone is going out, is using power. And the premise is, in this country, not like other countries, but in this country, if everyone flicks that light switch, they expect the light to come on. They don't expect it sometimes to come on. No. They don't tolerate that. That light's going to come on. Well, the infrastructure has to be built for that premise. Well, that's the coincidental peaks in these 4 intervals in the summer. And so the gaming of the system is you're going to get charged for whatever power you're using during that 15-minute moment, because that's the highest level of use and demand the infrastructure is being tasked at that time. If you're off, and we dispatch on that, we communicate to our users, be prepared, it's coming, it's going to happen, or it's not going to happen. If you're off, you've just impacted 30% of your utility bill starting next year.
Right. Yeah, so just to explain that for people that are listening that aren't aware, if you hit those targets and turn your power off during those time frames, those 4 kind of target dates, coincidental peaks, I didn't know this was stood for, but yeah, it's like a reduction the next year on your bill going forward, so long as you participate those as well, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a 12-month cycle.
Yeah. It settles after the 4-month summer. Ends in June, July, August, September. By November, you know how you did. Yeah. We monitor all that and have sensors that will make sure clients know what they did and how they did there. And then the soft currency, if you will, around it is your credits start divided by the next 12 months in January.
Okay. Yeah. So do you guys are you guys handling like signals to miners or whoever to shut down, or are you guys just kind of handling basically maximizing the value of their, ancillary benefits for the load that they have.
Yeah, we'll integrate via an API into the mining software so that we reproduce the elegant way they want to shut down or start up their miners when it happens.
Yeah. Is it like Foreman? Is it anything like that?
So Foreman, I love Dan. We've worked with Dan for a lot of things. We've had a lot of conversations around this because all the other DR providers out there don't have a controls capability. And so it's very simple for them to call Dan to say, shut down or, curtail your load on your miners. And so he's got a number of services, and one of them is what's called real-time price avoidance. And then we have a lot of services as a Queasy, and one of ours is also our real-time price avoidance.
Yeah. So you guys are a Queasy?
We are.
Okay.
Yeah, qualified scheduling entity.
Right.
Yeah. So we're registered with ERCOT, certified, so that when we bring load in of a miner who's got 10 megawatts, ERCOT trusts that what we've done is vetted the load, know they can perform. They'll still get tested, but we're validated that we bring them in, and ERCOT's good with us enrolling them, right?
Okay.
So we overlap in one particular service, but we work through that. So
good.
It's not like it's a big conflict or anything.
Yeah, good. I like Dan and them. So
yeah, right.
But okay.
But so if Foreman's not involved, then we have an API that will interface with whatever mining system they have to elegantly address how and what protocols they want to initiate a shutdown or a startup, and to do it fully remotely as well.
Yeah.
And because like I said, in all the verticals we operate in, if you're shutting something down in the oil and gas space, for example, you've got to make sure it meets safety protocols. If it's in a manufacturing plant, it's got to be, what work in process material do I not want to lose? How do I shut that down, and phasing out those power reductions, all to capture, without a lot of pain and agony, something that's very beneficial overall to the grid.
Nice.
I forgot to touch on something you asked, I think, earlier, and that was the oil and gas side of things, right? So the ramifications to Uri was that the Railroad Commission jumped in and says, okay, we created this vortex where supposedly, and there's a lot of argument about whether or not this was the case, but we kind of created this vortex where companies that were producing natural gas and contributing gas to the supply chain were being shut down by demand response, thus cutting off gas going to generate electric generation plants to produce electricity to keep us from that scenario, right? So the Railroad Commission came back and said, okay, we're going to designate through some kind of a map that we have around Texas, and anyone who's contributing natural gas to the supply chain, that you're deemed critical and you cannot participate in demand response anymore. So midstream, upstream, downstream natural gas, those players involved are critical infrastructure, and so they had to step out of demand response.
Oh, wow. Man, that's kind of interesting, because last year there was a bill where, and I don't want to say it was a lot of oil and gas companies kind of behind the sponsoring of it or pushing for it, where they basically were trying to eliminate a lot of the miners from participation in some of the ancillary programs. So that's kind of interesting.
So you have ERCOT as one group, and then the Railroad Commission is another.
Right.
And they've gotten better at coordinating, but back then, after Uri, they really weren't. And so the overshot was that no matter how much gas you were producing as even a byproduct of your oil operation, for example, if it met certain thresholds, you were considered critical, which means you couldn't participate in demand response. Well, the other vortex that's created from that is that you could have a oil and gas, producer. 90% of what they do is oil, 10% is gas. We have another Uri come along, and they're deemed critical, so they get to operate contributing 10% gas, but running 90% oil using, say, 9 megawatts of power. So they're actually creating a worse scenario on the grid, because they've been deemed critical with all the oil they're producing because of the power that's used for that.
Oh, man.
So my side note on that is, you can get an exception with the Railroad Commission of being critical when you show that your oil production is a lot higher than your gas production, so that you've got the reasonable opportunity to participate in those programs with ERCOT.
Man.
They try to do the right thing.
Yeah, they're trying to do the right thing, and it ends up screwing things up sometimes.
Sometimes.
It's like, that never, I mean, that rarely ever happens with politicians getting involved in things, so it surprises me, but
Right.
I'm joking, clearly.
Politicians are lawyers.
Yeah, dude, lawyers, oh my gosh.
The worst.
Yeah, they're the worst. So mean. But, man, look, that was really informative for me.
I think you just, I mean, you educated the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And everybody else probably learned something as well.
And honestly, it's one of the areas that I think most miners, well, outside of the big guys that, you know, basically hire people to come in and run that division or handle that for them. That's probably the area of the most questions that I get anyway from clients of mine and people reaching out is like, they want to know how much they can make and then what it looks like, what is required. And also there's always concern that like, oh, we're going to go put up some operation over here and everything's going to get diluted. We're not going to have opportunity to actually realize revenues like we're planning or forecasting for. But yeah, look, that was really helpful.
Absolutely, man.
Educational.
This has been great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
Dropping
guys.
knowledge bombs.
Are you
Get some
coming
new
to
clips.
Empower?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We need you there.
Yeah,
Awesome.
we do. We need a lot of people.
March
there.
26th, 27th here in Houston. We'll see all you guys there.
Yeah. Well,
Terrific.
thank you, man. Thank you, Joe.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah. Enjoy the
Love to
visit.
have you back sometime, man.
Absolutely. This has been awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Take 2 seconds, share this with all your friends, all your colleagues, tweet this out, post it on LinkedIn. We'll catch you guys in the next episode.